All right, this is Certified Sommelier John Allis, and welcome to my Stories from a Better World, another episode. In this story, I'm going to tell you a story from, I think it was spring of 1978, how I met one of my best friends in elementary school at St. Clements Episcopal School in El Paso, Texas, a heathen named Barry Griffith King. Now, when I came into now what you have to understand about St. Clements was that it was a school where the rich people sent all their kids. It was a religious school, but it really just had the veneer of a religious school. You had to go to chapel for 20 minutes. You had to wear uniforms 4 times a week. Fridays was Civics Day. And in the interim, you had to get a real serious education. So this was not a place for stupid people. How I wound up there is actually a great story in and of itself, involving, one of the best psychologists at El Paso, Texas. But essentially the upshot was, I had to go to school at St. Clements Episcopal School because I wasn't good about being around stupid people. Stupid kids, stupid teachers, anything. When I got to St. Clements Episcopal School, one thing I noticed pretty quick was there wasn't a lot of stupid people there. Luckily, there were miscreants. So I came in halfway through this. I wasn't in kindergarten. I wasn't in the first part of first grade, but I remember coming in and just fitting right in. I remember going in first grade. There was a circle of kids. I went by the name Eric back then, and I just remember the teacher saying, "Hey, we got a new student named Eric. He's going to be joining us." Everybody was like, "Yeah, all right, come on in, sit down," and it just felt right. Now, one thing you should know about me, I was a very good kid. I was beloved by teachers. I was beloved by parents because I got straight A's. I didn't cut up in class. I was just a good, all-around, quiet little boy. But there was one thing that I had a weakness for that I later found out turned into a strength, that I loved hanging out with the kids who made me laugh at the things I shouldn't be laughing at. And Barry King was one of those kids. I mean, he was naturally just a naughty little boy who he could not help but misbehave. If the teacher turned his back, he'd thumb his nose at her. He'd walk up behind kids and blow up a plastic bag, pop up right in the ear. And the thing was that Barry made me laugh. And so I was his audience, and I tacitly encouraged him. And Barry loved it. But he and we didn't really become friends until the end of first grade. And it took a lot of thinking for me to kind of remember what was the one thing where Barry and I became friends. And what I remember is that I was in first grade. This must have been mid-spring of 1978. And I had to go to the bathroom. And I remember at St. Clements walking down a long hall to go to the bathroom, and it had this gigantic, I don't know if it was oak door, very heavy wood door. And you had to get like a bathroom pass. The teachers had no issue with me because they knew that I was a good kid. I would go, I would come back. There were other kids like Barry, however, that you would worry about. So I remember I walked down just to use the restroom, and I walked in, and there's 2 other kids there. One of them I don't remember, but one of them I remember was a kid named Lee Bloss. And Lee, he wasn't the brightest kid at St. Clements. Lee had a big mouth. He would talk about all the stuff that he was going to do, but then he would never do it. And so Lee had a reputation for being chicken. And so whenever kids saw Lee and he still talked, they go, bark, 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 chicken, 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 because Lee was a chicken. And when I walked into that restroom, the first thing I noticed, I don't remember the other kid, but I remember Lee, was that he had this look on his face, and he's looking around, and I remember just thinking, Lee's about to turn chicken about something. And so I remember I said, "Hey, Lee, what's happening?" And he's looking around with this nervous look on his face, and he says, "Barry's about to clog the toilet." What? And he's like, "We're getting out of here. You're the lookout." I'm like, what the heck? And so I remember turning around and looking at the toilet stall and seeing 2 feet in there that clearly belonged to Barry King. And so I turn around, and I'm like, this is kind of a moment of truth here. If I was a good kid and I was involved in clogging the toilet at St. Clements, not only would I get eternal shame, you would get swats. Because at St. Clements, they believed in corporal punishment. And the last thing you wanted to do was get swats. Now, you wanted other kids to get them. You didn't want to get them themselves because there was a mean third grade teacher named Miss Harley there. And the one thing that Miss Harley liked more than anything else was giving bad kids swats. Barry never got any because he was too clever. He got sent out in the hall. He got notes home to his parents. He didn't care. But Barry never got swats. But he sure liked to see other people get some. But I knew right there that this was an incident where if I got caught, I was going to be in big trouble. So if I was a good kid, I should leave immediately. But what that would do was that would be me bailing out on a kid that I really liked and who made me laugh. And it would kind of be ratting on him as well, which I just couldn't do that. So the other thing was, I thought the idea of one of those big industrial 1970s toilets getting clogged at St. Clements was a really, really, really funny thing. And so I opened the door and I saw Barry and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "The other kids left." He said, "Well, I guess you're the lookout." I said, "Okay." And I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to clog the toilet." And now you have to understand that these toilets back then they had like a big water jet. These were not toilets like today where you have to flush 3 times. These were toilets designed to prevent elementary school kids from stuffing them full of toilet paper and clogging things. But Barry was a very clever kid. His dad was the best bone doctor in El Paso, Texas. His mother was some ditz who, obviously was a trophy wife. I think she took a lot of Valium. And so Barry was kind of half and half. One day he was very smart. The other day he was kind of a ditz. Some days, like that day, he was kind of both at the same time. So what Barry said was, he said, "Look, if you're going to clog a toilet like this, what you have to do is you have to get the cardboard insert, the tube, you got to wrap it in toilet paper, and you got to put it in sideways. Because if all you do is stuff it with toilet paper, this thing is going to go down." And sitting there looking back at how did a first grader know this stuff, I have no idea. But all the naughty stuff, Barry King just had an intuitive sense of how to do it. And so by the time I got in there, he had already stuffed that tube full of toilet paper, stuck it down there, and then what he did was he took all the rest of there weren't 2 stalls. He took all the rest of the toilet paper from the other stall and put it in there, because what Barry wanted to do was, after all the commotion had died down, he wanted another kid to go in there and use the bathroom where there was no toilet paper and get caught. Because Barry was always thinking ahead. There's nothing he loved better than a 2-for-1. So he had literally stuffed that entire toilet full. I said, "What are you going to do now?" He says, "I'm going to flush it." And I was like, we got to get out of it, because I knew that while the teachers weren't worried about me, they would be worried about Barry King being gone, and the time was ticking. So Barry reaches over and he goes, whoosh, and that thing goes, whoosh, and I'll never forget the sound it made. It goes clunk. And we're like, "Oh my God, it really clogged." It was just clunk. And we were looking at each other, and then all of a sudden we see the water start to rise in the toilet. And we're like, that's going to overflow. We're going to have wet shoes. We're going to be busted. We got to get out of here. And so all of this went through our minds both at the same time. So we literally run for the door and we take a chance and throw this big heavy door open on a prayer that no one was going to be out there. And for whatever reason, it was completely vacant. So we literally stumble out of there a few feet. And I remember I'm laughing so hard that my legs won't work. They turn to jelly. And we're literally falling down. We can't get up because it's so funny. And then we see the water starting to come out from under the door. We're like, we have got to get out of here, or we're going to be busted, we're going to get swats, and it's not going to be a good scene. So we both literally pick ourselves up, and I think the saving grace of this was that we were in separate classrooms. If we had come in together, that would have been a real problem. Luckily, Barry went off to one. He was really good at getting a straight face. And for whatever reason, I got it together, went back, sat down, nobody was anything, and it was probably about 10 minutes before another kid had to go to the restroom, or the janitor or some teacher checked or something, and saw that water was flowing under the door and into the hallway. And as soon as the poor janitor, as soon as he went in there, he knew that this wasn't some kid who ate too much sausage or had an accident or something. He knew exactly what happened. He knew this was a professional job, and he knew who did it. It was Barry King. But there were no cameras back then. There was nobody around. There was nobody to actually catch Barry in the act. That was one thing Barry was very good at. He never got caught in the act. And I remember that, there were some, I didn't get called in because I didn't have wet shoes. Barry got called in, but Barry was too smart. He never blabbed about everything. He'd been interrogated so many times, he just didn't know. I mean, Barry's always, he always had an excuse. It must have been the 5th graders. It must have been the 3rd graders. Maybe it was the 7th graders. Barry always had an excuse. He was very slippery, and they just didn't have enough to pin it on him. And my only concern, because I actually was really scared about, being caught up in this, was that Lee Bloss would turn chicken and run his mouth. But here was the thing about Lee. Lee was more scared of getting swats than he was of turning chicken. And so while Lee was a blabbermouth, in this case, he was stone cold silent because he was so afraid that he could be fingered for being a part of this thing, even though he bailed, that he might get swats from Miss Harley. And that scared Chicken Lee so much that he kept his mouth shut. And so it was just after that, Barry and I became